In this lesson, you will see how to record and play your first macro. Go to the View tab on the ribbon. Go to Macros group. Click Record Macro. Now we're going to give it a name. So let's call it Test 1. Doesn't matter what you give it. Something that makes sense to you would be useful. Notice I have a shortcut key. You can do that. Just be careful not to reuse standard keys that Excel already has. You have a choice here. Where do I want to store it? Now in this case, if I store it in this workbook, Excel will force me to save the workbook with a new name because it gives it that special extension that is macro enabled. I could create a new workbook to save it in, and that new workbook would open and I'd still have my existing workbook open. The third option is more useful, the personal macro workbook, which is always there when you open Excel, which means anywhere that I'm on this computer, I use Excel, I have access to that macro. So if you have a macro in a workbook and the workbook is open, then any other Excel workbooks you open while that's open can use your macro. They don't have to be in the workbook where you're using the macro. So let's say, try out a new thing, macros. There we go. So there's a description. Now, down here, I see a little square. What does that mean? It means I'm in macro record mode. Whatever I do, here we go. Let's say I want to format something. Let's go to Home. And let's see. Let's go to Home. Let's say I want to have another color text and another background. Let's see. Can't see that. So let's try white text. There we go. Now everything I did is being recorded and could be done again. Okay, so let's see over here. Say I want to change that, and I'll change this to white. There we go. So now am I done? Let's say I'm done. Doesn't matter how long or short. You go back to View, go to Macros, stop recording. See that little square here? It's the same as that little square down here on the status bar that shows your recording. Now I stop. Okay. Now I've changed my workbook. I don't necessarily want to do that. So let's see. Now, let's do Control Z, undo the changes. See if I have a macro. Go over here to Macros, View. Aha. So here it is. Notice it tells me the workbook it's placed in, which is personal, and the name I gave it. Let's run it. Aha. Notice how fast that was. I thought slowly. It doesn't matter. My macro ran in like a second. Any mistakes you make when creating a macro, if you redo and undo, it doesn't redo and undo. It just does the final result. So if you go backwards and forwards in your macro, it doesn't matter. So let's create another small macro, and we'll call that Test 2. Again, it makes more sense if you give it a name that you remember. I'm going to store it again in my personal macros, and we'll say another test. Here it is. Now, whatever I do, you can see it's in record mode with that little square down there. Whatever I do, say I want to make it a table, doesn't matter. It's going to be there. So, insert table. There's my table. There it is. Now I'm done recording my macro. I go to View, Macro, Stop. Okay. Now, let's do an undo just to show you that it worked. There we go. This is all back to, right? Simple text. Nothing's there. Sitting there innocently. Okay, then. Record. Let's go to View Macros. I have two. I have Test 1 and Test 2. Notice it shows me that I stored it in my personal XLSB, which is a binary that is very compressed workbook. So let's run 2, and there it is. Notice how quick that was. So a macro is simply a group of commands that you want to do again and again, and once you record it, you can choose from your View, Macros. here, View Macros. You can choose which one to run. And if I had a bunch of worksheets open with macros, I would see them all and I could run them. If I didn't want to see them all, down here under Macros In, I could select only Personal. That's the place I place them. If I just say this workbook, there's nothing in there, right? Because they're all in Personal. So all open workbooks is the default, and that's pretty good. So I'm going to close that now, and this is the end of the recording and playing your first macro.